When is one healer actually better than the other healer? Now in this video, we're going to be talking about several categories for many different account types. So maybe you're a person that is looking to pull on Luocha's rerun, maybe you have been saving up for him, and you want to know maybe my thoughts on Huohuo as well, and when she might be better. Is it actually worth it to shift that requirement to pull his rerun into Huohuo instead? In this video, we're going to be talking about when to use each particular healer. And first things first, why do you even want either of these healers? Firstly, they are both very strong. Healers in the game currently are very high in demand. Based on some statistics that we have recently seen, Luocha is one of the top characters in the game in terms of utilization. Everyone uses him, or more or less everyone uses him. If they have him, another character will be a character like Fucc. And very similarly, a lot of us are also thinking Huohuo is going to be like such of a character because sustain is very valuable and hard to come by so far. Because the rest of the sustain are either 4 stars, which are pretty solid too, or standard 5 stars, which might require a bit more luck to get the gacha correctly, the one that you want out of the rest of the standard characters. So anyway, the first thing that I want to talk about, it would be damage taken, which really is the essence of healing, because healers are meant to sustain your characters. So the type of damage actually differs very greatly, and one definitely does outperform than the other in a certain category. So if we are talking about a single target damage, a character like Luocha tends to outperform. A character like Huohuo might not outperform as much in a single target damage because he has the ability to immediately proc that emergency trigger, especially if they fall below a certain life. It goes into a cooldown, which is why if it's spammable, it will be like insane god healer. But unfortunately, it's not spammable. It's based on his turn order as well. And this is very well utilized, as we know and see already, for a character like Blade. Although it's not damage taken from the enemy, but it's damage inflicted on his own self. Blade saps his own energy whenever he's using his enhanced basic attack. He's like using his skill to enhance it for the first time, and using his ultimate, it sets it to like 50%. They combo very nicely because of this mechanic and the requirement of Blade to use periodic sustain as well. That is why they work very well, and I think if you're a Blade haver, Luocha definitely outperforms a lot more than Huohuo, sorry. Just putting it out there if any of you are curious. Where it becomes a bit more difficult to explain directly will be a character like Jingliu. And let me explain. So Huohuo, now that we know that single target, maybe Luocha outperforms. When does Huohuo outperform is when there's actually a little bit more AoE damage. Why do I say that? Luocha has a bit of AoE damage as well, but it comes mainly from his field. One of the things that we see, for example in the Swamp Disaster with all the bosses attacking very furiously in an AoE fashion, a lot of your squishier characters might die because they are unable to keep up with the enemy's damage incoming in an AoE fashion. That is why a character like Fucc outperforms him a little bit in the Swamp Disaster, especially against very difficult content. That is one of the key downsides of Luocha. If you can't keep up with the enemy's momentum and their attacks, likely he will fall behind in terms of AoE healing. You might be able to heal 1 unit, 2 units to keep them alive, but you'll very quickly realize that your roster is thinning very quickly because the monster just keep killing the rest of them. That's when a character like Huohuo actually outperforms a little bit, because her healing, her skill ability, is controlled by the player themselves. So if you build her fast, she can cast it more often, and you can work around your skill point limitations. His, on the other hand, is based on your character's turn orders in order to heal in an AoE fashion. So that is something to note. A character like Jingliu, I put her in the center because it is a little bit on both sides. She saps the HP of your team, but not by a very significant amount in a short period of time. Both of them are able to tackle her HP requirements very well, but it doesn't factor in the enemy's typing and their team compositions that they prefer. I would say for now, in my opinion, in the current game state, Jingliu will likely favor Luocha a bit more, simply because if you have Blade, Jingliu together with Luocha and maybe a character like Bronya, Blade and him works super well together, and the synergies between them just work so well that this is likely the favorite comp. I don't see a situation where, for example, Huohuo is sword tier and outperforming a character like Luocha in this particular situation as well. Also because she doesn't really require the attack percentage that Huohuo gives. She might do a bit with the energy regen, but the synergy she gets here from this 4 character team is just so much better, and that's why I don't think Huohuo is likely going to outperform for like destruction characters, for example like Jingliu and Blade. That is my own personal opinion as well. Whereas if you have a character, for example like Imbibitor Lune on the other hand, this is when I think Luocha is not super critical. In fact, I think he might shift more towards the left-hand side here with Huohuo, because he can use her energy that she gives, he can use the attack percentage that he gives, because this destruction character here doesn't have any like HP sapping mechanic, doesn't work exceptionally well with any other particular HP sapping characters as well. So if you are talking about moving forward, you have more single target damage, you have more characters that sap their own life, or you're planning, you like these kind of team compositions, you want to build more on that, Luocha is going to outperform if you just think about it in the damage taken category. If you are planning to play more into more AoE team compositions, maybe more AoE damage, or you want a generic healer that pretty much will work well across the board regardless of which, provide some energy as well, I think Huohuo likely will outperform for this first category, depending on really your roster and if you are a Blade main as well. Now the second thing I want to talk about, of course, has to do with the most obvious thing that is the difference between both of them, is their ultimate ability. Luocha strips enemies buff, it does imaginary damage in an AoE. Huohuo, on the other hand, gives energy to the rest of your team as well as attack percentage buffing to the rest of your team. Very fundamentally different. The question that I would have is, this part here of buff removal for Luocha, it really depends on what Hoyoverse plans to do in future. We can't really predict whether they are planning to make it a more relevant thing, but currently in the game, very few characters have buff removals or stripping of enemy buffs. Off the top of my head, not thinking too much into it, I think Pella is the only other character. There might be one more, I can't really remember right now. If you guys remember, let me know in the comments below too. But based on what I'm thinking, I think it's only Pella as well as Luocha right now that has buff removal, and he is the only character that can remove in an AoE fashion, which is very insane. The only character AoE buff removal, or perhaps one of the only characters with AoE buff removal. This means if there's more like Xianzhou Luofu monsters with that annoying revive ability, super critical. But of course, you can argue that maybe Hoyoverse wants to make Luocha not as relevant. They could put like multiple weaker buffs, for example like minor attack buff, minor defense buff, minor HP buffs. Then you have to remove every single one before you get to like the most important one, so there's an RNG involved in terms of the buff strip. That is a bit more annoying, and I can see that is a way how they sell you in future a character that can guaranteed remove all buffs from the enemy. I think that will be a whole different topic altogether. But still, at least offers you a bit of versatility for offense, for defense, depending on what you require. Huohuo, on the other hand, is a little bit more controllable based on the player, because you don't really care what Hoyoverse is planning to do in future. You don't really care about what they have in mind, whether they want to nerf characters or what. Energy attack is generally universal, and that is why I think a more stable choice is Huohuo. You give energy to any character, most characters in the game have absolutely need for their energy requirements. Some need it a little bit more. For example, a character like Argenti does love to use the ultimate ability. Characters, for example, like Jingliu does like to use her ultimate ability, does like to favor this as well. Clara to some extent, and definitely many other characters do benefit from the ult ability as well. So with that said, of course, not everyone cares too much about attack percentage that she gives. For example, characters that mainly scale off with HP percentage, for example, like Blade, a little bit more of HP percentage. Again, similarly, Jingliu scales off a little bit more with damage percentage, crit, so she doesn't really care too much about the attack buffs that Huohuo gives. In that case, it's a slight favorite to characters like Luocha. And one thing that I want to point out is Luocha actually has a very massive attack percentage buff in his E1 that not a lot of people talk about. Of course, this is E1 and it's not fair to like compare E0 and E0, but if you are just purely thinking about attack percentage, you might be eventually considering a E1 Luocha with attack percentage. So that's why I named this category like energy and buff removal, because in essence, that's the thing that separates both of them in terms of the ultimate ability. Hope you don't mind if I make that quick assumption as well. So that aside, I think that is the main thing that I want to talk about for this category. Now let's move on with the next category that I want to talk about, which is amount of CC. And this is something that I hear very seldom actually, and is one thing that I want to value add to this conversation. Amount of CC matters a lot to these two, and why do I say that is if you think about his field healing. The way that his field heals is, for example, you have characters like Blade on the field, let's just say you have Jingliu on the field and Ronya, let's make this a proper team comp. Only when, let's say his field is active, when the character attacks, the rest of them get healed. So if you have enemy monsters that, for example, like freeze your whole roster here, and they are unable to act, because generally these characters here won't have very high effect rest. The one that has very high effect rest probably will be Luocha. So if they freeze your characters, The only one that is able to act probably is going to be Luocha, which reduces very significantly the amount of AoE heals that you get as well. Whereas if you do on the flip side, you put like Mark 7 here, and maybe you have a team, for example, like let's just say Kafka and Huynh here as well. So if you freeze these units, because she has very, very high effect res and she has AoE healing, the healing doesn't drop because she's the one that's outputting all the healing based on her casting ability. She also is the one that is able to cleanse. He can cleanse too, of course. I'm not saying he can't cleanse, but I would say it's a little bit slower. There will be a dip in the amount of sustain that you have until these units heal up and has a requirement for that field to be up. No downtime in the field too. Whereas hers, more straightforward, more simple to play. She doesn't get frozen as often because she generally will build with relatively high effect res. It's much easier to find effect res from light cones for abundance characters too. So I think amount of CC matters a lot. If there's a lot of content that has super tons of like CC, freeze, imaginary, control, like a Kafka control on the enemy, like enemy Kafka rather, controlling your units, I think Huohuo is likely going to outperform in this particular category compared to a character like Luocha as well. So that is mainly the 3 categories so far. There's one last one that I think is probably what I want to value add as well, and that will be a category on DOT teams, which I think probably is where the biggest shining point for a character like Huohuo over Luocha. Most of the content that we have talked about so far, the analysis that we have done, you can see it tilt either way, and some of the things are out of our control. What is within our control is the rosters that we have, and out of all of the units, I think that Blade is the one that shifts it more towards the Luocha. The thing that shifts clearly towards Huohuo's favor will be DOT teams. Why do I say that? DOT teams can't crit at all, so they definitely like attack percentage a lot, and if you think about the nature of damage taken for DOT teams, they tend to split the damage very evenly across the board. Let's say you have a triple nihility team, or maybe at best you have 1 harmony and 2 nihility characters, together with a sustained like abundance character here, you will realize that none of them have aggro draw or are able to equip any light cones with aggro draw as of currently version 1.5. In that case, a character that has more AoE sustain does thematically fit much better into a across the board healing for DOT teams. On top of that, she provides attack percentage buff that they all require at E0. He does it at E1, but anyway, that's of course a lot more money to be spent and a lot more resources. She does it at E0, and at the same time she gives energy buffs to the entire team, and all the damaging units like these 3 all love to use their offensive abilities too, because the damage is going to be split roughly evenly among your nihility characters. And similarly, in future when we get more damage over time characters, they will replace these like 4 stars, maybe some 5 stars as well. She will still outperform Luocha in this particular team, and I'm quite sure of that as well. So depending on what roster you're playing, what are the team comps that you are doing, I think it's very, very clear which one outperforms. I hope that this video was very helpful for you, and if you want to add any more details to discuss, feel free to leave in the comments below. Happy to discuss with you as well. Otherwise, if you want to see more of such content, like, subscribe for more such future videos, and thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video.